These words are difficult for me to read and drain me mentally and emotionally, so I've been taking my time and typing my thoughts into a document so I don't forget to include them in the video by the time I decide to record each segment. In case you notice, my tone may sound like I'm reading from a script sometimes. Hello, my name is Quinn Slowinski. I was born at a hospital in southern Ontario. My nationality has always been a complicated topic, so I just tell people that I'm a mutt. My great-great-grandmother was a Cree Indian on a reserve in Haliburton, and my father is Scottish, who was adopted by Poles when he was very young. That's about all I know of my father, so I'm sure it goes much deeper than that. I hope to reconnect with him one day and find out. I think I'll be splitting this video into parts. Not all aspects of my life will be covered in this video, including and excluding certain details of my life as appropriate to make it easier to digest. My early life was pretty straightforward. I've always been bullied and was no stranger to taking the victim approach or putting my head down since a young age, both in school and at home. People still continue to try and bully me to this day, and they probably will until the day I die. I feel like bullying is usually just a projection of an individual's own weakness and self-doubt. Sometimes bullying can be an act of self-righteous elevation, such as pointing out a peer's weakness to try and cover up one's own. Sometimes it feels like people grow jealous of others and react by trying to make their own baseless accusations into facts in an attempt to snuff out a light that they covet yet may never possess with their slanderous claims. People always try to use me to achieve their own goals when they hear that MS is a disease that affects your nervous system. People often assume I'm less mentally capable at a basic cognitive level. That notion is often reinforced by the way I carry myself due to the way I've been conditioned throughout my life. I'm a large weirdo on purpose. It's safer for me to just put myself out there entirely and end up being a clown half the time, or completely denouncing people or groups entirely, as opposed to just putting on a mask and pretending I don't care. Sometimes it feels like I'm better off being alone because I'm too conscious of my own issues, and others are often too naive of their own. Under the surface, my daily life usually consists of listening to music or observing people and judging how they respond to weird shit I say, usually online. I'm a big shit poster. Everyone wants to have their opinions validated by strangers for fake points, and I feel like the true natures of others are often surfaced when faced with unfamiliar situations, and memes tend to help spark those reactions. I feel like making jokes is especially important in a world where we put a value on someone's opinion. I feel like if someone takes themselves too seriously, it's usually a sign of them being ignorant of their own flaws, and their ego is taken over due to a lack of real goals and the stagnation in their life that has basically led to them being on autopilot in their own way. In a way, I've basically become my own bully, and that's pretty much how I operate on a daily basis, in between managing to focus enough to get maybe one or two productive things done for that day. I've started working out every day since I quit my job. I feel like it's important to have positive goals. No matter how small they may be, these goals can range for anyone. They can be as simple as remembering to brush your teeth twice a day. It doesn't matter, but I feel like everyone should have goals to help make life feel less stagnant. I feel like people will often ask me, why not just ghost people you have problems with and let them assume you're still friends to make things more convenient? I've always had trouble ghosting people. The thing about ghosting people is you're basically just turning the other person into a statistic on your friends list. I feel like that's one of the most disrespectful things you can possibly do to an actual friend's memory. Sometimes the negatives just snowball until it's a lot easier to just ghost someone to have a real talk about real problems. I understand why people do it though. Everybody has grown addicted to overstimulation. Real talks are too slow and not usually worth the time. You're basically saying your time is worth more than others at that point. It feels like the reality of my situation is I'm just a tired, sarcastic creep that people are scared to confront. It's a bit of a vicious cycle. I hate fake people. I hate pretenders. I will usually confront people because I care. because it's possible they could just be misled, and if we couldn't see eye to eye, then say la vie. It's equally possible that I'm wrong, and that I could have my opinion changed just as easily by this confrontation. I guess that's the whole idea behind the philosophy that conflict brings growth, but I'm not going to act like I want to be a part of someone else's tiny world that they've engineered like a cult, and no one else should either. I'm hardly ever actually angry. I'm often disappointed by how fragile everyone is, especially since COVID hit. I still scare people because everyone's been taught to be focused on one aspect for their entire lives, to the point where everyone's just trying to be on autopilot as much as possible, like cogs in some infernal machine, blindly marching towards their own damnation. People often don't have a frame of reference when exposed to a person that's actually experienced life. They don't understand what kind of situation they're in, and that usually bothers people enough to assume the worst, which is usually how I lose friends, because it's a lot easier to just cut people out that are a problem. It bothers me when people are so shallow that they base their entire lives on materialistic things and appearances. Honestly, in my opinion, the worst kinds of people don't tell you what they're actually thinking under all their makeup and jewelry that they've adorned themselves in. Money is truly the root of all evil. I value clarity above anything. If you lie to me, I'll probably never trust you again. I might still talk to you, but I'll be completely disillusioned when it comes to our future interactions. I often feel like it's better for me in the long run to not have any friends that are close to me than it is to deal with potentially gross manipulative people that don't have my best interests in mind. A big daily goal for me is to live a stress-free life, and you have no idea how difficult that is to achieve, especially in 2022. I'd go as far as to wager it's impossible, so I just try to minimize as much as I can instead. It's funny to bully people myself sometimes with how fragile people have become, especially on the internet. On a deep psychological level, we've all grown obsessed with niches and distractions. I honestly don't believe I'm as paranoid as I convey. I feel like if I assumed everyone was evil and wanted to do me harm, then I probably would have been stressed to death a long time ago. So I try to assume people are equally mentally capable and their moral compass remains as balanced as mine until I'm proven otherwise. I feel like a lot of people use the internet as an excuse to get more angry or defensive than they actually are for the sake of coping with their own personal turmoil, or to make themselves feel more important. Like a boon or a rancor of sorts, the anonymous text comments from strangers on the internet reinforce delusions. But I digress. It's gotten to a point where I'm always telling myself that people hate me or that I'm cringe or whatever, because that's what I've been told my entire life, and eventually those voices evolved into the excuses that I've always used to protect myself, justify laziness or disconnect from people before I open up for the sake of reducing potential stress in the long run. Before the naive, impetuous natures of others affect my physical health in catastrophic ways. Because as someone with MS, that's pretty much part of the risk of pretending to ignore red flags. It's hard to not be kinda paranoid with that in mind. People are unpredictable. I have been flashed countless times by fat, disgusting old ladies when I had a job in customer service. I've had customers cough directly in my unprotected face during the COVID era. I still haven't caught COVID though. I think I might be immune. I don't want to jinx it though. I've had countless people try to take advantage of me, and that definitely builds up over time. A lot of people have been conditioned to feel like they have to separate themselves from the concept of fun or games or whatever in favor of being more adult, or their definitions of fun have been boiled down, twisted into unhealthy outlets with real-world consequences, tarnishing the overall image of gaming as a whole. I feel like it's just another example of self-righteous elevation over peers. Being able to balance video games is a big part of finding balance as a person, in my opinion. I feel like most people that live in extremes are usually just trying to compensate for something. People are far too materialistic and looking to buy happiness, when sometimes happiness can come from being able to decompress and focus on something less real. That's where some video games become the great equalizer, and China wanting to limit children's exposure to video games and the internet, calling the video games and the internet spiritual opium, kind of reinforces that. If I suddenly decide I'm too old to have fun at age 50 plus, I'm sure it's because I've also decided I wanted to become a miserable cunt and rely solely on the ambiguity and uncertainty of interacting with other humans to help supply me with dopamine. Given my experiences in the past, I feel like that's unlikely to happen. I heard a pretty good philosophy once. I don't fully remember it, but it kind of went like, we spend our whole lives being taught to sacrifice our potential for purpose, then spend the remainder of our lives fighting to get that potential back. I've always felt that rejecting your own potential is another way that stagnation forms to push you into succumbing to your own depression, and most things should be taken in moderation. That even includes fun. You can choose to keep your eyes firmly planted on your goal in life that you set for yourself, or you can take the time to look around and enjoy the scenery. Sometimes I feel like I often get lost in the scenery and find myself stuck in one spot for too long. But I'm only human. It's always possible to find balance again. You just have to be committed enough. I don't care that I'm weird. I feel like it's what makes me special. I see that these people that just go through their lives on autopilot, living for the next thing to say, weaving shells of lies, digging holes that they're too scared to climb out of. I'd rather just be myself. It's far less of a hassle than surrounding myself with people that don't even like me for who I really am, or even know what I am about as a person. I cannot be held responsible for refusing to accept the side effects of meds that act less effectively than just smoking weed. I feel like I've also always had GAD, or generalized anxiety disorder, that has either been helped or hurt by weed, depending on the strain. A common thing that I've always told myself when I had a drug problem and was unable to regulate myself was, I don't care if you hate me. I hate myself too. It's your problem. And now I've enabled myself to treat myself like this out of spite. Eventually, my life became this endurance task where I'd seek out those kinds of people that wrong me to try and prevent them from wronging others. I'm not the only person with MS out there, or other problems. A lot of the worst people are the ones that are able to fool you into thinking they're not crazy for the purpose of keeping up this network of manipulation that they've built, because that's where their moral compass sits. Some people will do the opposite and pretend they're crazier than they actually are just for attention, which either way that you spin it, the results are the same. Both ends of the spectrum share the same desire to pretend and escape from reality instead of improving the one that they're in. I've never been a materialistic person. I have a different kind of vice or fixation, as you'd like to call it. I guess I'm just addicted to learning more and understanding the truth. I hate being wrong, so I fill my day with listening to documentaries and interviews to learn as much as I can. From an objective standpoint, I'm especially fascinated by how the human mind works and evolves under certain conditions and stimulations. Human beings are capable of disgusting, horrid acts of atrocity, and then those same people are capable of turning around and loving and caring within the same minute. Pride and prejudice have become so much of a staple in current society that one of the obstacles that kept me from recording this video was the potential backlash that I would receive. I honestly have to ask myself when meeting a new friend group if this group is more in common with a cult or a clique. Are they networking in the DMs behind your back and treating things like it's a hierarchy of information shared and that one guy that everyone fucks with? Sometimes people put you in their harems without you even knowing it, and the only thing stopping someone from pretending to be you is one information leak. Everyone's playing a different kind of game, and no one's playing by the rules anymore. The worst part is, most people that do these things are usually just misguided or misinformed, and are just instruments for the real people trying to do damage on a large scale. But I digress. When I was a kid, I guess there was just a day where I developed enough, or I was changed by my environment and started seeing just how fucked up the situation I was in actually was. Because I remember I wasn't always unhappy. I would trade Pokemon cards, play Game Boys with my friends during recess, and think about normal things for a child to think about. I was too young to understand what I was feeling, too young to understand the context of my situation until I wasn't. I come from a very devout Christian family, United Pentecostal, for those with a frame of reference, and they conditioned me to believe that suicide is a coward's way out and only leaves devastating effects for the survivors to clean up, and I honestly agree with it. I feel it's true. I was never willing to open up to my family because I felt like I would just be faced with more belittling or aggression. Needless to say, eventually didn't mind that I made myself an easy target at school. I got into fights a lot, or I would get caught defacing public property, which would often result in me being suspended. I would often get in trouble for things my friends and I would do off school property on weekends, and we would get suspended for burning things because we were obviously too young to be charged by the law. I just wanted to feel like I belonged to something. I just wanted a distraction from my life at home. There was a great disturbance within my soul. My only sources of love and nurturing were making me feel like I wasn't worth shit half the time. Religious abuse is an example of people taking something pure and twisting it to try and fit their own bias or narratives. I don't hate religion, nor am I an atheist. I've seen enough in my now 26 years on this planet to acknowledge the presence of a higher power. I just don't feel like it cares about our daily lives, nor is it omnipotent. That's just my opinion, though. I understand the important role that religion plays in society. I also feel like there's a lot going on behind the scenes to make what the public actually knows about not worth it caring about. And there's a lot of perversion fueled by the media that makes certain people you find in life turn things into a bad sitcom with how scripted they act. My mom and her husbands often fought based on money or religion or whatever they could come up with, really. Screaming and fighting were a daily event for me. I often felt like the black sheep because I would pretend to be sick or asleep in order to try and get out of going to church. Needless to say, I was never able to actually believe in God. I would plead and cry in my room all the time, just praying for a sign, usually after a family-driven domestic episode. Eventually, that desire flipped into spite, and the only thing keeping me from killing myself was the hatred for the hypocrisy that had been displayed before me every day under the veil of religion. As I got older, around maybe 12 or 13 years old, I remember sometimes we would go to these massive church conferences, and I would just stand there as like 6 people I've never met in my life would put their hands on me and start praying for me, and I was always just extremely uncomfortable and could never get into it, and always just go home feeling drained and confused. I met plenty of nice people from my family's denomination of Christianity at the time, but it was never something I'd be able to see myself incorporating into my daily life. Sometimes my parents would fight about things that no child should ever witness. My stepdad felt that since my mother wouldn't have sex with them, that they weren't officially married. My mother felt that they shouldn't have sex unless they were trying to procreate. There was this one time when no one else was home. My stepdad told me that my mom told him to have a shower with me and teach me how to properly clean myself. Upon getting into the shower with him, I immediately noticed that he had an erection, to which my poor naive self that had no frame of reference decided to point out by saying, "Your willy is a lot bigger than mine," to which his response was, "Yeah, want to touch it?" To which I responded, "Yeah, I guess." This was a normal thing to do, right? I thought to myself, I mean, why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't he ask if it wasn't a normal thing to do? I guess he was just having second thoughts of whether or not he wanted me to touch it, because he reacted by pushing me hard and I hit my head against the tub, and the rest of the situation is fuzzy until after we got out of the shower and he put a towel on me. I didn't even remember that the previous event happened until I was too old to be traumatized by it, too entangled by the potential consequences that telling people would bring. But even after remembering, I still had to keep it a secret, because after their divorce, up until my mom retired, she was still working for him at a business that he was managing. I knew that since my mom has a more severe form of MS, it would be hard for her to find a job that would accommodate for her needs, so I bore the burden of silence, even when she got me a job working for him at their company, and I had to see him 5 days a week. I was still being controlled by my depression, and was just letting myself exist in this toxic situation despite the effect that it would have on my mental health in the long run. I guess that's part of what makes depression so dangerous. You literally just stop caring about your own well-being. I can't remember the last time I told someone I loved them or got a hug, and that only bothers me because it doesn't bother me. I miss when I cared about showing these emotions to people. I've been conditioned to be alone at this point, and I just live with my depression. Like a giant rock I have to step around every day. I could just move the rock if I was strong enough or I had help. I've always believed that people who assume others would be interested in their lives are the worst kind of people for me to deal with, and everyone I've told my life story to in the past are people that I felt I trusted wholeheartedly, and they've all told me to write a book about my life. It kind of patronized me, so I never really felt motivated. It feels like a narcissistic concept. And I hate shackling my imagination to the guidelines that someone else has set into place. Then I realize that there might come a day where I'll forget who I am or what I'm about, and I've always found comfort in listening to streams or having commentary videos on YouTube playing in the background, and I'd like to imagine doing this helps trick my brain into thinking I've had human contact in a way. The concept of writing a book about my life feels a bit romantic too, I guess. The idea that even after my death, a piece of me might continue to live on. So I decided that if I could create something that would benefit even one person that needs to hear that they aren't the only ones that have to deal with these emotions, and that these chemicals being released by their brains are only temporary and a reaction to their environment that they have complete control over changing, and all that matters is if they're ready or not. It's not like I've dug myself into this hole in a day, and it's not fair to myself to assume that I can climb back out in a day either. Such fantastical illusions are why I've been discouraged in the past when trying to get over my depression. Like, I can't take care of everything at once. It's impossible. But it's not impossible because I've been making progress with it every day since I started trying. For a long time, I subscribed to this philosophy that if I can't be happy on my own, it's not fair to bring someone else into the situation as a significant other and complicate things for everybody involved. But I digress. The family unit that I grew up in consisted of me, my mom, my 2 sisters, my grandma, and whatever stepdad was in the picture at the time. This led to so much gaslighting and favoritism that I had to disassociate to preserve my own sanity. Instead of trying to build an actual emotional bond with her kids, my mom hoped she could get away with buying her kids affection, and in exchange she would maintain absolute control over every aspect of her upbringing, which is fair by law and societal standards. But since I was usually turning down these offers to be included in family trips that my mom could ill afford or expensive shopping sprees, I was basically just seen as an ungrateful asshole because I would rather have the time alone. No parental figure in my life has ever really invested much time or energy in getting me to actually open up. My mom's attempts to get me to talk with her about my depression were stifled by the fact that she was one of the main causes of my depression at time in the first place. And any time that I explained how I felt, it would always be met with a sarcastic response and more favoritism for my sisters, followed by an "oh, shut up," or a "you think you're always right, don't you?" If I ever pointed out how I felt like I was being treated unfairly, I guess this could be interpreted as opening up. Most of my positive memories growing up have come from my interactions I've had online or with friends in real life. One day, my neurologist confirmed to me that medicinal marijuana would be effective as a natural method of anxiety or stress relief, which was exactly what I wanted to hear to enable me. I got a green card in my province before it was legal. I just had to go into a BC local store and show them all the MS drugs I was on at the time, and they just took pictures of it and gave me one on the spot. I never really forget how easy it was and how much of an impact getting that card had on my life until afterwards. I was able to get weed products shipped to me from BC, including edibles like THC pills, which quickly became my go-to high for the effectiveness, easiness to ingest, and the high duration. I recently had to accept that there will come a point in your life where no one will see eye to eye with you, and you just have to look inward and find that imbalance within yourself before you can move on to a point where you can reimagine who you are as a person. I've always had a job off and on throughout my life, but it's hard to hold down a job with MS just because of how unpredictable the disease is and how easily it is to fall into a toxic situation where you find yourself bending to the whims of someone else. Needless to say, life tends to find a way to pile more obstacles in my path. It didn't take long for me to get to a point where my disability is usually the last thing on my mind. I never really enjoyed life much when I was growing up. I guess if I had to, I would describe my childhood as tragic. Domestic abuse is rarely ever framed as us versus the problem. It's usually framed as we have this problem that we can work through by making the other person submit or compromise to our own personal bias. Since I was basically mentally or emotionally abused pretty much my entire upbringing, I was really anxious to move out as soon as I graduated high school at 18. I enrolled in college for a culinary arts degree, not caring if I was ready or not. Sadly, my environment changed, but I was still just as messed up from my past, and that translated into my effort that I was putting into college as well. I never attended my classes and just drank all day, only stopping to do my secondary courses as if that somehow would have helped my situation. I feel like my mother felt like she had to fill the role of both parental figures by being stricter on me compared to my sisters, or maybe she just saw me as a whipping boy to take out her frustration, a black sheep of sorts. She had been through multiple unsuccessful marriages with various stepdads that had their own flavors of scorning me and detaching from me as a father figure. Her motives didn't matter to me. All I cared about was the effect that it had on me over time. I never felt like I had a parent. I felt like I had wardens, captors, rulers that I had to either avoid or comply to for my own well-being, and the only way I was getting free was when I reached 18 and legally became an adult. I asked my father if he would take custody over me multiple times, but it was never convenient for him. And I was just a child. My opinion didn't matter until I'm 18. At that point, I can just leave, so that's what I did. We get so comfortable in our realities, strolling through life on the road worn down by the footsteps of so many others before us. Then one day we wake up and our whole world's changed, and we weren't even conscious to witness it. Our familiar surroundings are suddenly tilted askew, and nothing ever looks right or quite the same ever again. I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis at September 26, 2014. I was around 18 at the time and had just enrolled into college and adapted to the lifestyle of constant stress and heavy drinking, Both are huge triggers for the first symptoms of MS. Then one day after drinking myself to sleep around noon, I woke up and half my body was numb. I still remember how I felt when I first opened my eyes and staggered into my kitchen. Everything that was going through my mind beforehand was mute. All the assignments that I had been putting off, the dishes my roommates refused to do, the next class that I had to skip, nothing mattered anymore. Reality was going a mile a minute around me, and all I could think about was why I was suddenly numb on the entire right side of my body. I was still able to function and use my affected limbs, but I was less coordinated overall and very tired. I told my dad, who had never shown any interest in me as a person until I told him that I was going to college. Suddenly he was the most supportive I had ever seen him in my life, and he was even willing to pledge financial support while I was attending classes. I told him I had to drop out because I thought I had a brain tumor and had no way of getting to classes outside of walking, and I wasn't ready to stand around all day either. So now I had an excuse for not attending classes at least. Regardless, he wasn't very supportive when I hit him with this news, and he responded with, "It's okay, son. Only the good die young." I had to laugh. Eventually, one of my roommates woke up, and when I told them what was wrong with me and that I needed a ride to the hospital, they eventually begrudgingly agreed to give me a ride. I don't even remember the drive to the hospital or how many tests I got taken once inside. Everything went so fast. All I remember is sitting on the hospital bed while they gave me my diagnosis, and that's when everything froze. I felt some sort of grim satisfaction when I was finally told what my problem is. This was back when people didn't think MS was hereditary or that you could pass on a different type of MS to your children. My mom was diagnosed with MS when I was maybe 5 or 6. I was too young to remember the exact year, but I remember when she explained how MS works to me. She basically told me that MS is when your brain gets confused and tells your body to do something it doesn't want to do. My mother was diagnosed with an untreatable form of progressive MS. This means it will constantly get worse over time, and there's no form of treatment for it. It's similar to my form of MS because relapsing remitting MS will eventually become a treatable form of progressive MS, but there is no drug currently in existence capable of eliminating every symptom of MS, and individuals with the disease will often feel static symptoms that will either get better or worse in direct correlation with their lifestyle and daily interactions. My mother only felt slight numbness in her legs when I was growing up. She's now currently wheelchair bound, residing in an assisted living building. I've been told by my neurologist that MS is more aggressive the younger you are when you get it. Apparently, there are cases of children developing it very early on that have just died straight up. One of my biggest fears is that I'll one day end up in my mom's situation, and I've been fully paralyzed before while I was in between treatments, and that feeling of complete powerlessness and dependence, like you're trapped in your own body, is a feeling I hope I'll never experience again. I've always struggled with drugs. It's a lot easier to escape and forget about the people yelling around you and making you feel like you're not worth anything if you're stoned out of your mind and balls deep in a 12-hour RuneScape grind. Being diagnosed with MS only enabled me to seek escapes from reality even further. I was able to get a green card before it was even legal in my province, and that made me cool and with the big dogs of my tiny podunk town. I've had many neighbors growing up. One of my neighbors owned huskies. One of their huskies took a liking to me and liked to follow me home, which my family's teacup poodle didn't agree with. One day my neighbor's husky responded to this challenge by biting my dog on the hind legs and shaking her around like a chew toy, while I was still standing right next to them, frozen. I knew I couldn't do anything, or else I might get bitten as well. Our dog survived, but that always kind of fucked me up. Like I could have done something, but I was too scared at the time. This other neighbor I had we'll call David to protect his identity. David was a trust fund baby from a rich family. He was lost, but for a different reason than the people he surrounded himself with in his daily life. His family's basement was pretty much his home that he converted into a one-bedroom apartment / trap den. Sometimes living in excess creates more holes than it fills, and sometimes it sets you on a racetrack you didn't train to be on, running in a race your soul has no stake in, being fed a constant stream of dopamine from the puff of a cigarette or the pull of a slot, feeling like you're playing the game of life with cheat codes on for as long as the drugs last. David was the biggest drug dealer in our neighborhood, and I was able to get my hands on basically any drug I could have asked for, from horse tranquilizers to mushrooms. It didn't matter. I found myself drawn to shrooms and weed, mostly for their spiritual aspect. It basically did only those exclusively. I didn't do shrooms often though, because he would rip me off and only sell me the stalks instead of the heads that have the most hallucinogenic properties. Needless to say, I was still addicted to the lifestyle of waking up, going out to my shed, getting baked as fuck, then going over to my neighbors and partying all day. I was lost as well, and I had nowhere to go. I was living on disability, spending my entire check on drugs, back living with my overbearing mother that's still obsessed with trying to make me go to church or arguing with my sisters. I forgot to mention that my grandma has always been a part of my life. The idea that any single person would be able to support themselves comfortably in the 21st century on their own without going to college or receiving exorbitant amounts of money from the government is a far-fetched concept. So my mother and her mother had to compromise and settle with the hand they were dealt, both being insufferable, unreasonable Karens for the sake of their future, along with whatever unwilling husband my mother could find to rope into our fucked up situation. Not that anyone would want to live alone, but I don't mind living alone. It does get sad though when you only have yourself to talk to. It makes you feel less relevant when you're spoiled by people caring about your day. Eventually, I was unable to support my toxic lifestyle of spending my disability checks on high-end weed products, so I reconnected with my local dealer that promised me good deals, a Stacy from high school that lived in a broken household with her parents. I won't even get into that story right now, it's too fucked up. But all that matters is that situation is what pushed me to move 8+ hours away from David or anyone. First chance I got to get a lease with an old friend I hadn't reconnected with since high school. I was desperate to get out of this at this point and didn't want to live as a burnout loser with my mom, grandma, and 2 sisters for the rest of my life. So, as someone currently living in subsidized housing and on disability, I can say that the government system responsible for the distribution of wealth to the depraved and disabled is a depressing frontier that would be best compared to a rusty machine that cuts those it dispenses aid to in the form of, oops, we messed up, sorry you get less money now, or as I like to call it, overpayments. I have received consistent cuts in my disability payments since the start of the COVID era, most of this due to the fact that my local government body is unable to find me a new caseworker for my file. During this time, my financial status didn't change. I didn't start working. Had I not been keeping track of my monthly checks, I probably wouldn't have even noticed that my payments had been dropped. This probably would have completely flown under my radar up until they hit me with the final notice of, oops, we messed up. But this confusion was enough for there to be irreversible damage done to my physical and mental well-being, as well as my monetary wealth. All while these caseworkers tasked with sitting at their desk for $20 to $50 an hour with vacation pay are forwarding their spiritual, mental, and emotional and financial debt, honestly. If the government messes up by taking a week-long vacation because they had to punish their support's recipients and then cope about it afterwards due to their own inept abilities to do their jobs or relay information properly, I guess as a synopsis I'm trying to say is, if something is lost in translation, the recipient of the support must receive less support as a result. This system has taught me to only invest in what I'm truly passionate about. This also perpetuates a toxic and slow cycle where the negative feedback that's meant for those who mess up so they may improve in the future is deflected onto others, creating a system that protects the problems and showing little compassion to those with nothing, usually struggling with addiction, unable to maintain a healthy mentality and positive goals that lead to a better lifestyle because they're already depressed and dependent on something by barely making enough to make ends meet and constantly living in the red. The only reason I've had any money at all is because I got my tax returns from taking up the ass doing a 9 to 5 for minimum wage. Most others in my situation don't even have a support network to help them cope half the time. I don't feel like the government is poorly ran. I feel like the fundamental systems we've established to live by is inherently flawed, and the best we can do is improve it by moving forward. But silencing those that criticize their persecutors through inaction is a malignant solution that can only lead to backlash in the long run. And when the veil between the government's issues and the population is slowly starting to get peeled back, inaction often becomes the strongest action you can take. Anyone with half a brain knows that most human beings adjust their lifestyles to match their wages. I was told once that it's impossible to enjoy life if you're unable to invest at least half of what you make into your future. I don't think I even need to explain the level of psychological anguish someone would feel when faced with the tyrannical rule of a letter in the mail, or the cold, unfeeling text on a screen explaining to you how your life is going to get worse. You can't plead your case to a computer or a piece of paper. I feel like this is one of the biggest causes of depression, that disconnect, that floating helplessness of understanding your existence is owed to another that's just able to adjust your quality of life with the push of a button. I don't hate my mother for how I was treated growing up. There was just a disconnect there, a miscommunication. She was merely conditioned by her mother, and her mother was probably conditioned by her mother, and so forth. I was pretty much conditioned and raised by the internet, though, to fill the gaps I was missing in my life growing up. That being said, I hate most of humanity and the society we built as a whole, as a species. We act based on assumptions, guided by our own insecurities or flawed conceptions, terrified of what comes next in our lives, constantly trying to escape our inevitable decline, clinging to anything that makes our pain go away with like selfish, impetuous pigs, even if it's the wrong thing. Never once thinking to ask the right questions to the right people until it already doesn't matter anyway. I know because I have been guilty of doing it in the past myself. Comparing a sentiment to how individuals act, people are often a lot more docile in a one-to-one situation when not hooked up to the constant stimulation of their own confirmation biases. And most people are just trying to finish being on autopilot at their jobs so they can go back to being committed to their own personal lives. Some people don't turn off autopilot, honestly, even when they get home. I pity those types of people because they've proven themselves to be controlled by the feedback loop of being a cog, that they've been conditioned to believe their lives should be lived as cogs. I hate the society we built on misinformation, selfishness, tyranny, and regret. Less and less people truly care about anything unless it affects their own egos. Children are being raised by technology or by each other like novelties, investments that their parents can hope to eventually show off, being better than everyone else at being mediocre. Most people just want to make someone the next clown that they can point down to. Some people just want to be that clown. Everyone wants to make a power struggle by flexing what they have. Everyone's thinking about what they could be missing and trying to stay caught up with the wave. I know because I've been guilty of doing it myself. C'est la vie. No one wants to confront their own demons. Everyone wants to throw stones until they get hit. No one wants to accept that they're cringe or stupid in certain aspects of their life that are causing a detriment to them as a well-adjusted member of society, even if cringe is usually just a reaction to something you don't understand. Most people just want to cope like they've been raised to do by any means necessary, and any urge can be ignored or overcome. With the right devotion and commitment to the strong positive moral compass, any abuse of another living being is typically a reflection of one's own weaknesses through failure of emotion, mental, or physical conditioning. I am fully aware of how Canadian Indigenous tribes have been and still continue to be mistreated to this day. For 40 years, certain Indigenous tribes still haven't even had access to clean drinking water. The government still hasn't fixed this issue as the time of recording, which is March 2022. I'm fully aware of how Indigenous children have been abused in the past by Catholic churches across Canada. I don't hold any spite towards any of these offending parties, the Catholic religion, or how it's ran currently. I hold no stake in any of these issues. They do not concern me on a deeper level, but I still think about these things more than I probably should, because they affected potential ancestors of mine. Throughout history, there have been many similar instances of tyranny, ethnic purging, or decimation of a population. If I were to name them all, this video would never end. Because these things still continue to happen to this day from an objective angle, I'm not trying to cancel religion or cause a movement against the government. Abusers and misguided individuals come from any end of the spectrum, from teachers to parents, from left to right, is what I'm trying to say. The best anyone can strive to do is look to brighten how their own lights shine instead of trying to dim the lights of others.